Hello everyone. Welcome to the Sounding Smart channel. My name is Alexander and I am extremely frustrated, to tell you the truth. Why am I frustrated? Because there is this video that's been going around that's been drawing some attention from many YouTubers wanting to learn a little bit about US history, specifically the history of the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem of the United States. They've been reacting to a specific video that's been around for a little over a decade now called the Star-Spangled Banner as You've Never Heard It. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and pause the video and check it out. The link is in the description box down below. Now before we move on, I really want to be very clear that it just makes me so happy to have many people from around the world wanting to learn so much about US history, especially Americans wanting to learn more about their own history. Please go ahead and follow them, support them. I'll have all of their info down in the description box. Now, I always believe that in order to be a great teacher, one must always be a great student. So I have looked everywhere online to track the main source of this video, and luckily I found the culprit. It's a man by the name of David Gibbs Jr. Now, he's a Christian law attorney and a preacher, and I am actually here to stop him from rewriting American history, or for him to want to fit his own clean and high, mighty glory standard of a historical claim. It's enough of all these American revisionists when it comes to history. So join me as we review and correct Gibbs's historic inaccuracies in the Star-Spangled Banner as you've never heard it.
There was a lawyer once. His name was Francis Scott Key. He penned a song that I'm sure you're aware of. You've seen it. It's in most hymnals throughout our churches. It's called the National Anthem.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop right there. So Francis Scott Key was a lawyer from Baltimore, and he wrote a poem that he originally called the Defense of Fort McHenry. Now, Francis Scott Key was known to write lyrics to hymns and songs. That said, if he was writing a poem as opposed to lyrics, it would have been from a tune called An Anacreon in Heaven. Now, Anacreon in Heaven was an anthem for this London-based amateur music club called the Anacreonic Society, and it was founded in 1776, and it often met at the Crown and Anchor Tavern in London. Now, whether Key was thinking of the tune to really to apply this poem with is still really heavily debated amongst historians and musicologists to this day. So, yeah. Continuing on.
It is our song as an American. We go, however, to a ball game, we stand in our church services, and we sing the words of that song, and they...
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. This may be an ignorant statement, to be honest, but I have not heard or spoken to any Christian American who's stated they've heard listening to this anthem during certain church services. Is that allowed? I don't know. I have no idea. If this has happened to you, go ahead and enter in the comments. I really want to know if you have had this experience. But just pointing out. Moving on.
They float over our minds and our lips, and we don't even realize what we're singing. Most of us have memorized it as a child, but we've never really thought about what it means. Let me tell you a story. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer in Baltimore. The colonies were engaged in vicious conflict with the mother country, Britain.
All right, so there's already something that just really sounded very strange to me. So the narrator actually said colonies. Now, keep in mind that this is actually, he's really starting to make a point that this was during the Revolutionary War, the American Revolution. And, but that's actually wrong. Now, first off, I mean, the poem that he wrote was about the end of the Battle of Baltimore during, of course, 1812. Now, yes, they were not colonies by this time. Let me point that out. It's a country. It's the United States. These United States. So, technically, he got the country wrong, at least from my perspective. He got the war wrong by stating that these were colonies. That just seems so far off. Already off to a good start. Moving on.
Because of this conflict and the protractedness of it, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. The American colonies had prisoners and the British had prisoners. And the American government initiated a move. They went to the British and they said, let us negotiate for the release of these prisoners.
Definitely something wrong here. There was actually a local physician by the name of Dr. William Beans. Now, Beans was a 65-year-old doctor who actually got captured by the British. And the reason why is because he was actually accused of interfering with British military operations. Why? Well, he actually captured a few British stragglers after the soldiers actually sacked the Capitol building over in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately for Beans, one of the stragglers actually managed to escape and actually got word out to British authorities. Now, one of those authorities actually happened to be a major general by the name of Robert Ross. Now, Ross was there to be given command of 4,500 troops, and his mission really was to seek retaliation against the Americans because they invaded York, Canada a little while ago, and about a year prior. Now, after hearing about what Beans had done, Ross was absolutely furious about that. So he managed to capture Beans, and they brought him back where he was actually to be put on trial over in Nova Scotia. After, of course, hearing about this from many friends, and of course the rumors, well, not really rumors, but when the news spread all across Maryland, many of his friends actually contacted Francis Scott Key to see if they can get Beans back. Now, luckily, Key actually got the blessings of President James Madison to go ahead and return the doctor safely. So while he was on his way, he was actually stopping by around Bladensburg, and he was actually being given letters of letters of many of Bean's friends and many of the locals. Letters that actually provided supportive evidence of the fact that Beans actually helped many British officers during the Battle of Bladensburg. He actually attended to many wounded British soldiers, and maybe with these letters in hand, it can help weigh many of the British authorities to actually return Beans back to Maryland's shores. So after he actually got the letters, he actually went ahead and met with a United States exchange prisoner of war agent by the name of John Skinner. So after Key got the letters and then he finally met up with the agent, they went ahead and moved on with their mission. So we got that cleared out of the way so far.
They said, we want to send a man out to discuss this with you. They were holding the American prisoners in boats about 1,000 yards offshore. And they said, we want to send a man by the name of Francis Scott Key. He will come out and negotiate to see if we can make a mutual exchange. On the appointed day in a rowboat, he went out.
So I'm going to pause right here. Get my notes. It wasn't a rowboat. It was actually would have been more of a sloop, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, a cartel. And for those of you who don't know, Key and Skinner would have been riding on either one of these. So for me, I feel like most likely a cartel or a cartel when they were sailing on the mouth of Potomac. So that would have been my assumption, was mostly leaning towards the cartel because it was mostly used for humanitarian purposes, especially if it's being sailed under a flag of truce. Also, now many people would argue that it did have a single gun on hand, but keep in mind that gun was not used for aggressive actions or for offenses. It would have mostly been used for signalings or distress calls. Yeah, moving on.
Out to this boat and he negotiated with the British officials, and they reached a conclusion that men could be exchanged on a one-for-one basis.
Okay, one-for-one basis. Again, there was really no one-for-one basis as far as I'm aware of. It was only there just to return Beans back to the US. Plain and simple.
Francis Scott Key, jubilant with the fact that he'd been successful, went down below in the boats, and what he found was a cargo hold full of humanity, men. And he said, "Men, I've got news for you tonight. You're free." He said, "Tonight I have negotiated successfully your return to the colonies." He said, "You'll be taken out of this boat, out of this filth, out of your chains."
Okay. This is totally fabricated. This conversation never happened. This is a completely different story to what's been going on with the reality. So let's continue on.
As he went back up on board to arrange for their passage to the shore, the admiral came and he said, "We have a slight problem." He said, "We will still honor our commitment to release these men, but it'll be merely academic after tonight. It won't matter." And Francis Scott Key said, "What do you mean?"
Alright, so again, all of this false. So when Key and Skinner actually got to the British flagship of Vice Admiral Sir Alexander Cochrane, which is the HMS Tonnant, they spoke to General Ross, who just simply would not allow Beans to be returned to the United States. And many British soldiers on board the Tonnant agreed. They refused to let him go. I mean, after inviting Key and Skinner to dine with them moments later, Ross and Cochrane began discussions with Beans with the two Americans, especially after Key actually gave them the letters proving that Beans did aid with British soldiers who were wounded during the Battle of Bladensburg, I believe. So they were really attesting to Beans' goodwill. Moving on.
He said, "Well, Mr. Key," he said, "tonight we have laid an ultimatum upon the colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down the colors of that flag that you think so much of, or you see that fort right over there, Fort Henry?" He said, "We're going to remove it from the face of the earth."
So, I mean, again, this is just a completely made-up conversation. Quite the revisionist. Actually, so to be honest, it was actually during this time that Key and Skinner overheard freely discuss plans about the Battle of Baltimore and on the attack of Fort McHenry. So from neighboring British soldiers. So Cochrane actually having been aware of the eavesdropping that Key and Skinner were doing, decides to not let them leave. That pretty much was just it. So he simply kind of let the men go back to Baltimore, and of course, why? Because of the possibility of them releasing the information to the Americans, and of course, foiling the attack. You know, they just simply could not take that risk. Also, the British simply, I'm sorry, could not care less about that flag. I mean, I would love to include the fact that he got the name of the fort wrong. He stated that it was Fort Henry, when in fact it's Fort McHenry. And you can easily Google that. And I believe he failed to do that. And Google, rest assured, was around at this time. I can't believe you couldn't even get that right, to be honest. Moving on.
He said, "How are you going to do that?" He said, "If you will, scan the horizon of the sea." And as he looked, he could see hundreds of little dots. And he said, that's the entire British war fleet.
I have to say that seems just a tad bit small to be the entire British war fleet. Apparently, this narrator just failed to understand the magnitude and the power of the British naval fleet. Even for because this is way too small. And first off, even a small amount of ships can do just heavy damage. I mean, do you not understand how many guns were on some of these ships? So I have here, by 1810, Britain's fleet had about 152 battleships and large amphibious craft, along with 183 cruisers. So at the Battle of Baltimore, however, the British didn't really need that much, to be honest. As I said, just a few of those ships can actually have some heavy damage. So at the Battle of Baltimore, there were only around 17 ships, although some would argue that it would be 19. So it consisted of 5 bomb ships, 1 rocket ship, and other frigates and warships. Also, keep in mind that because there was just such shallow water at the time, Cochrane couldn't even use his heavy 74-gun warships. Now, why such a low number of ships? Let's go ahead and get back to the ships. Well, because, frankly, it was during this time where the British were actually concerned with something a little more important than the United States, and that is Napoleon. Now, Napoleon was actually creating a large amount of problems over in Europe, especially during with the rise of the Napoleonic Wars and all that. But believe me when I say, they were concerned more about defeating Napoleon in the European front rather than a little war with the United States at the moment. Moving on.
He said all of the gunpowder, all of the armament is being called upon to demolish that fort. It will be here within striking distance in a matter of about 2.5 hours. He said the war is over. These men would be free anyway. He said, you can't shell that fort. He said, that's a large fort. He said, it's full of women and children. He says, it's predominantly not a military fort.
All right. So, not fully true. Now, Fort McHenry actually completed construction in 1803, and the fort actually ended up becoming an outpost for a small standing army. Now, I mean, to be honest, it was not full of women and children. No possible way. And I mean, at the very least, I mean, my assumption, I'm just making a gut statement here, is I mean, children would have been maybe apprenticeships for a certain blacksmith shops nearby that would have acquainted with probably some ammunition or something like that. That's, I mean, I'm just making a gut statement. I'm not an expert on that. But actually, on records, one of the 4 casualties that happened actually happened to be a woman, and the reason why she died was she was actually carrying supplies to American soldiers during the battle, during the attack of Fort McHenry. Yeah, moving on.
He said, don't worry about it. They said, we've left them a way out. And he said, what's that? He said, do you see that flag way up on the rampart? He said, we have told them that if they will lower that flag, the shelling will stop immediately. And we'll know that they've surrendered, and you'll now be under British rule. Francis Scott Key went down below and told the men what was about to happen.
No, he didn't.
He said hundreds.
Again, not hundreds.
Francis Scott Key went back up on top and he said, men, I'll shout down to you what's going on as we watch.
No. Okay. So, Key, Skinner, and Beans were not on the HMS Tonnant at this time. Now, the trio were actually sent back to the Truce Cartel that we were actually mentioning much earlier, along with with a few British soldiers being at their side to be sure that they actually do not escape. Now, it was actually, all the while, the vessel was actually tied to the 38 gun frigate, the HMS Surprise. The truce vessel was actually being towed on one side of the Patapsco River, where that was where Key actually saw the attack and, of course, wrote the famous poem.
As twilight began to fall, and as the haze hung over the ocean as it does at sunset, suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. He says the sound was deafening. There were so many guns that there were no reliefs. He said it was absolutely impossible to talk or hear. He said suddenly the sky, although dark, was suddenly lit. And he says from down below, all he could hear the men, the prisoners, saying was, "Tell us where the flag is. What have they done with the flag?
Again, this is entirely made up.
Is the flag still flying over the rampart? Tell us." 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling, every time the bomb would explode and it would be close to the flag, they could see the flag in the illuminated red glare of that bomb, and Francis Scott Key would report down to the men below, "It's still up."
All right, now, kind of adding a little bit here. I may have forgotten to mention to tell you that the flag was pretty much raised during the battle. Wasn't the actual 30-foot by 42 15-star, 15-stripe flag that we actually know today was of the actual Star-Spangled Banner. Now, it was actually a storm flag, which is actually much smaller at the time. Now, storm flags are actually made up of stronger materials. So, and of course, they were supposed to last through some of the harshness of battle conditions and weathering at the time. So, continuing on.
It's not down. The admiral came and he said, "Your people are insane." He said, "What's the matter with them?" He said, "Don't they understand this is an impossible situation?" Francis Scott Key said he remembered what George Washington had said. He said, "The thing that sets the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is he will die on his feet before he'll live on his knees."
All right, so I looked around and George Washington never said that. Now, this is actually a quote taken during the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s during a miners' strike in Asturias, Spain, by a woman by the name of Dolores Ibarruri. So, nice try. No. Do your research.
The admiral said, "We have now instructed all of the guns to focus on the rampart to take that flag down." He said, "We don't understand something. Our reconnaissance tells us that that flag has been hit directly again and again and again, and yet it's still flying. We don't understand that." But he said, "Now we're about to bring every gun for the next 3 hours to bear on that point." Francis Scott Key said the barrage was unmerciful. All that he could hear was the men down below praying. The prayer, "God, keep that flag flying."
I love how they're putting George Washington illustrations, even though he passed away a long while ago, before the war even happened.
He said there was a heavy mist hanging over the land, but the rampart was tall enough. There stood the flag, completely nondescript, in shreds. The flagpole itself was at a crazy angle, but the flag was still at the top. Francis Scott Key went aboard and immediately went into Fort McHenry to see what had happened. And what he'd found had happened was that that flagpole and that flag had suffered repetitious direct hits. And when hit had fallen, but men, fathers, who knew what it meant for that flag to be on the ground. Although knowing that all of the British guns were trained on it, walked over and held it up humanly until they died. Their bodies were removed and others took their place. Francis Scott Key said what held that flagpole in place at that unusual angle were patriots' bodies. He penned a song.
Alright, no. I'm just gonna stop there. I'm gonna call out total bull. The amount of lies in this is just horrible. I mean, I just stated that there were about 4 deaths, 4 casualties, and there were 24 wounded. Oh gosh. That is just the worst. Alright, so I'm gonna go and stop there. Well, I don't want to hear anymore. Now, why did I decide to stop all of my other projects to focus on this rant? Well, I'm here to say that rather than taking parts of history that make it seem glorious by clipping and pasting to your own version of an alternate historical timeline and trying to convince others it's true does not do justice to those who have lived and those who have died for that time and cause. One should rather preserve the history in its own for being own right for the future of Americans to learn what it means to be American. I don't know about you, but for me, being a patriot does not only mean drawing what the great American dream and goal could be for you or them, or what great achievements Americans have done for the betterment of their country or humanity, but it also is acknowledging the flaws, the horrors, the tragedies, the failings, because it shows that for how we've grown as a country. Explore, embrace, evolve, and take care of yourselves, because you deserve it.